If this is your first time on the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button and notifications bell. That way you know when I post all my Nerd Guy News content. Welcome to Nerd Guy News, where all nerds collide. So, it looks like we are back on the planet of Coruscant in this new episode of The Mandalorian. And I'm just happy to see that we're back on this planet because now we get to see Elia Kane again. And in this episode, Elia seems to be walking in the streets of Coruscant. She is very suspicious. She's walking around. She's trying not to be noticed by everyone. She's tracing her steps, making sure no one is following her. And she enters down this dark alley. And when she gets to the end of this dark alley, it is revealed that there is a probe droid at the very end lurking in the shadows. And this is the same exact probe droid that normally captures, rebels or any innocent person, and they interrogate them. But this particular droid had a message, a hologram message from Moff Gideon himself. That's right, Moff Gideon. And she is basically telling Moff Gideon that there are Mandalorians forming together, both factions, and Moff can't believe it. And he finally knows that Bo-Katan is leading these two factions and they're coming to reclaim Mandalore. So Gideon is now telling Elia Kane to go back to the New Republic and spy some more, get more information, and report back to him. So that is her role. Moff leaves the hologram and he appears to be in some headquarters somewhere underground. And he's walking through this corridor where these lights seem to be very reminiscent to the Phantom Menace, like the ray shields. And you see these super commando suits that are aligned down this hall. What is going on? Where are they from? We don't know, but apparently Moff is trying to gain an army. He goes through this corridor, another corridor that leads to this other room. And as he gets to this room, we see that there are other chambers of clones of something or some being. We don't know what Moff has in store, but apparently he is trying to clone something or someone. He comes to the Shadow Council, which is a secret Imperial Council that reports on all dealings. And we see all these warlords come together and talk to him about a lot of the things that are going on in the galaxy. And there's a lot of confrontation between Moff and these other warlords about what's going on and what does he actually need from them. One of the council members mentions Grand Admiral Thrawn and how his return is imminent. But Gideon believes that this is quite funny because Grand Admiral Thrawn hasn't been around for a while. He feels that his existence right now is a threat, and he's worried that the Mandalorians are going to come and destroy him and compromise his whole entire mission. So he asks for new leadership, which I'm sure the council will make a vote. But then they start questioning that he is asking a lot of resources from these other generals. Well, they provide him with guards, TIE fighters, and bombers. There's a reason why. It's because the Mandalorians are trying to take over Mandalore. And for Gideon, he believes this is the perfect opportunity to use the resources of the Shadow Council. And from there, they grant him the things that he needs. And from there, he says, hail the Empire. And then the beginning of a new story begins. So we return to Navarro, and Navarro has been damaged by Gorian Shard and the pirates, and the citizens and the people of Navarro are trying to rebuild as they notice that an Imperial ship is hovering above them. They don't know where this ship is coming from. They don't know who's aboard this ship, but Grief Karga is in his office and he realizes that this ship that is hovering above the town of Navarro is actually Mandalorians. And these Mandalorians are here as privateers to help them, and he welcomes them to Navarro in hopes that they're here to help establish a better town and a better city. We then cut to the camp base of the Mandalorians who are in Din's faction as they look up above and they see that this fleet that was captured by Bo-Katan and her group of Mandalorians, and they're landing at base. Bo is kind of worried because this is their first time of two different factions meeting each other. And it's a pretty cool dynamic that we get to see Bo and Grogu spend some time together. Maybe it's a little bit of foreshadowing there. But they land on the ground and both factions become to greet each other. You see pretty much Death Watch, and then you see the Night Owls. So what we're getting now is a confrontation between two factions that haven't really met, have two different beliefs, and Paz Vizsla tells his son Ragnar to basically take the children inside just in case if there's a confrontation or a fight that may break out. Bo-Katan and the Night Owls approach. Death Watch stares ominously as they are trying to see what is going to happen between these two factions. They approach each other. They're staring at each other. Bo-Katan stops with her Night Owls, and Axe Wolves decides to do a stare down between Paz Vizsla. I really believe both of these two are going to get into some type of fight. Once they remove their helmets, Paz Vizsla and Death Watch are they're looking at each other as if they're about to brawl because they removed their helmets and it's not a part of their beliefs. It's disrespectful to them. Paz stands his ground, and the tension rises as the armorer clangs both of her forging tools together. This brings the armorer to welcome the other members of Mandalore, the other Mandalorians. They both decide to have a feast as Axe Wolves and Paz Vizsla stare each other down, smoldering. I honestly believe these two will get into a fight later on in this episode. Then we notice that Greef Karga shows up, and he greets Din, and he has a surprise for him. He greets him with some wine, champagne, or some type of alcoholic beverage all the way from Coruscant. And Greef Karga says he has a surprise for both of them. So they head back to the city of Navarro, and we see IG-11, who has been reformed, and he is up and walking, but we have an Zelen in the middle of his chest, and Greef Karga is basically explaining to Din that IG-11 is no longer IG-11, he's IG-12, and that Grogu can fit in the center console and can control him like a vehicle. So Grogu decides to play around with the controls, and this is the first time we actually hear Grogu speak through a third party. So he presses the buttons and he can say yes or no. He's walking around Greef Karga's office, and he's getting used to the controls of IG-12 now. And Din does not seem too happy about this, but he decides to just live with it, and they decide to go walk through Navarro and grab a couple of things before they head back to camp. However, little Grogu, he decides to pick up a lot of food and different things around the area, and it's causing so much ruckus for Din. It's actually kind of adorable to see him do this. We then transition back to camp where both tribes are feasting, and we see a lot of the Night Owls are conversating with themselves about the primitive Mandalorians from Din's tribe. But then Bo-Katan decides to give a brief speech about taking Mandalore back. We see her taking center stage as she tells all of her fellow Mandalorians that Mandalore is not cursed, and that the atmosphere is breathable, and they can return to Mandalore and retake their home planet and find a way to settle down. And the best way to do that is to find the Great Forge. So she needs a couple of Mandalorians to come along with her. At first, a lot of people were hesitant. Din Djarin and Grogu decide to join Bo on this mission to Mandalore. Bo decides to ask more Mandalorians to join. Everyone was hesitant, but then Koshka decides to join Bo on this mission. Axe Wolves decides to join Bo on this mission. And then other members of the tribe decide to join Bo on this mission. And the more Mandalorians kept joining, the more the entire tribe really wanted to go along. After acquiring a few more bodies, Bo had enough Mandalorians to help out on this reconnaissance mission back to Mandalore. So, as every member of the tribe come together, the armorer was the last person to join the faction to go on this mission. They pack up the next morning, they put everything in their light cruiser, and they jump into hyperspace as they leave the planet Navarro, their second home planet, to go back to their home world of Mandalore. We see this incredible shot of them coming out of hyperspace. They're floating over Mandalore. They decide to stay in orbit over Mandalore as Bo-Katan and the rest of her team decide to descend down in the planet. Now, we're waiting for a minute because Bo is hesitant to go down. She wants to make sure everything is fine. She's letting the armorer know that their communications are going to be obsolete until they get down to the bottom of Mandalore. And once they're on planet, they will have no communication at all whatsoever. So we get to the drop zone. We see Paz Vizsla looking down at the bottom of the gauntlet, and he clearly sees that all of Mandalore has been completely destroyed. We see Axe Wolves telling them that he was there the night of the purge happened and the bombing of Mandalore. Din is watching from afar. He's making sure that all of his tribe, his mentors, his friends are all prepared for this mission. He returns back to the cockpit where Grogu is sitting in the chest of IG-12. Paz and Axe are waiting for the drop zone, and we get another beautiful shot, which I love this shot of the Mandalorians dropping out of the gauntlet. I think is one of the most cinematic shots that I've ever seen. It's just so beautiful as they're jumping out of the gauntlet and they're getting ready to land down onto the surface of Mandalore. As they land, they prepare, they pull out their weapons, not knowing what is on the planet, what danger awaits them. The gauntlet lands, and we see that Bo is exiting the gauntlet and she's ready to lead her team. As our heroes make their way across the landscape of Mandalore, they notice that there's something in the horizon that's heading towards them. Din was the first to spot it, and as they look closer, they notice it's a ship. Could it be a pirate ship? Could it be something? No one could make out what it was. But then they realize that the ship stops, and these three Mandalorians happen to jump out of the ship, and they approach and they land. When they remove their helmets, they realized that these three Mandalorians were captains or generals, mercenaries, whoever they were, during the night of the purge of Mandalore. They bow to Bo-Katan and tell Bo-Katan that their blasters are still in service to her. Later on that night, one of the captains who served Bo-Katan was basically telling her how devastating the night of 1,000 Tears were in the purge. Bo begins to tell them that the surrender never really happened. It was really the fact that Bo-Katan gave the Darksaber to Moff Gideon. This is one of Bo-Katan's biggest griefs that she suffers, because she feels that she let down her people, and she is letting her people know that she was trying to do the greater good of saving them from Moff Gideon, but Moff Gideon betrayed her, and now she's trying to do the best that she can to lead her people to greatness and victory again. We then approach Bo-Katan at the end of the ship, and her and Din are talking about uniting the people. Bo feels like she can't keep her people together. She feels like there's too much animosity and that the Darksaber is the only way to keep them together. But Din tells her that the Darksaber means nothing. It's loyalty and honesty, respect is what keeps him loyal to her. So he looks at her and he tells her, he says, his service is to her, and her song is not yet written, and he will serve her until it is. I thought that was an incredible line, and for them to have that dynamic together shows that those two will be probably a couple later in the future. We skip to the armorer, and apparently she is helping out the wounded on the ship. There are quite a few that cannot carry on. So Bo-Katan tells them that they're leaving in the morning, and the armorer says that she is taking the gauntlet and taking the wounded back to the fleet so they can be tended to their wounds. They found out that they have to go to the Great Forge. The surviving Mandalorians tell Lady Bo that they can take them to the Great Forge. "Onward, Mandalorians, to the Forge," he says. The rest of the Mandalorians decide to stay on their ship as they head to the Great Forge, while Paz and Axe are playing a game of chess or checkers. One of them makes a move, while the other one patiently waits. Paz decides to jump one chess piece, and Axe Wolves decides that the move that Paz has made was not a reputable move. Paz feels like this was the right move to make, but they are having differences on who's playing the right move and who isn't. So Axe Wolves decides to tell Paz that you can't make these moves, and that is very primitive of you, for immature of you to even make that move. Paz is upset. He gets up. He challenges Axe Wolves to a battle. Either he makes a move or he submits to battle. Kashka and the rest of the other Mandalorians looks on as they get ready to fight, and Axe Wolves knees Paz in his helmet, and they begin to have an outbreak of a fight on their boat or their ship or whatever it is that you want to call it. So Paz and Axe Wolf are fighting. Bo and Mando are basically looking on. They can't intervene. They cannot step in this fight. It's two factions fighting against each other. Everyone is looking at each other, trying to figure out who's going to beat who's going to win. Paz is getting the upper hand on Axe Wolves. Axe Wolves is actually enjoying this battle. He actually smiles and looks at Kashka as if he's enjoying himself, as the other members of Din's tribe are watching, almost emotionless. Grogu seems to be upset. He doesn't want any of them to fight, so he steps in and he stops them from fighting before it gets even worse. This is a big hint that Grogu is going to be the one to really unite the Mandalorians together. And Din and Bo are basically looking at Grogu, very proud of him, and she basically asks him who taught him that. Din responds with, "It wasn't me." Obviously, he learns this from Luke Skywalker. Later, we see the ship heading towards the Great Forge. They're getting closer. The armorer is now in space, hovering above Mandalore and getting ready to drop off the wounded to the fleet. It was actually very interesting to see that scene because that certain Mandalorian has armor very similar to Jango Fett, so I thought it was very cool to see that. As we see the armor goes up and she's dropping off the rest of the members, we show back up on Mandalore, and the rest of the Mandalorians are on their way to the Great Forge. They're almost there, and they notice something in the distance. Something is moving. It looks like some crystals are falling. Something is breaking structure, and they cannot make out what it is. As soon as they get close enough, they realize that it is a giant creature on Mandalore. Not a mythosaur. This was too small to be a mythosaur. We don't know what it was, but it was huge. It was gigantic, and chaos, absolute chaos, just broke loose on their ship. Big, huge explosion. The monster destroys their ship, and all of them are using their jetpacks to escape and get away. It was the only way that they could get to safety. Paz and Din rescued Grogu in IG-12 now from the ship, and they all land on the rocky crystal surface of Mandalore. The captain ends up telling them to go further down into the caverns. Obviously, they have made their way to the forge safely, but they want to make sure everybody is safe. So they get to the end of the forge, the entrance of the forge, and as they walk in, they see all of the tools and the mechanical structure of what was once of the Great Forge. You see Axe Wolves telling a tale of how they lived at the Great Forge and how they basically made the Great Forge their home after the Purge. And pretty much they hear jetpacks that are arriving. They're thinking that they're Mandalorians, but they're not. This is Moff Gideon's elite commando force, or clones, or whatever they are. But they come and they attack the whole entire tribe. And Axe Wolves somehow makes an escape to go get reinforcements. Din and the rest of the tribe are trying to fight off these super elite commandos, and they are basically getting their asses handed to them. And Bo is trying to do everything that she can to stop them, and they realize that they're wearing Beskar armor. So Din tells Grogu that he has to keep up. They have to try to get to the Great Forge and figure out what's going on. And the more they keep running through the Great Forge, the more you see that the structure is starting to look more Imperial. By the time they get to the end of the Great Forge, they notice that there's TIE fighters. There's a whole base of Imperial TIE fighters and ships and weapons, and they are trapped. It was a trap. It was Moff Gideon himself. Someone trapped them in there, and the door slammed shut. And we see Din and Paz and a couple other Mandos on the outside, and they're basically getting swarmed by all these super elite commandos that Moff Gideon has formed and put together. Din is doing everything that he can to defend himself, and he holds himself up for quite some time as Grogu looks on desperately and worried that his father is going to get killed or injured. And Din is getting choked by these super elite commandos. He's getting pinned down. He's trying to fight his way out, but then Moff Gideon shows up in this incredible, badass Mandalorian suit that's something we've never seen before. I mean, he looks like Darth Vader mixed with a Dark Trooper, and he has horns on his head, like a crown. Very reminiscent to the Armorer, I think. That's what at least it looks like. And he makes his way over as he says, disarm him. And Din is basically captured, and he is making his monologue triumphant speech to Bo-Katan and all the other Mandos that are desperately watching on, hoping that Din doesn't get killed or injured. But Moff Gideon then threatens the rest of the Mandos and asks Bo-Katan to give over the Darksaber, but she doesn't. So he threatens and he tells the super elite commandos to take Din to the briefing room, and he is going to activate the TIE fighters and the bombers to destroy the rest of the fleet that's in space. Since Bo did not give the Darksaber over to Moff Gideon, they are trying to make one last stand to make sure that this does not happen again. We do not want the purge to happen. They don't want to be killed off. They're the last of their kind. And Moff is making one last stand to basically kill off all the rest of these Mandalorians. So he sees that Bo is inside the corridor, and Bo is taunting him basically with the Darksaber. And the rest of the Mandos are blasting their way out of there, buying time for Bo as she escapes. And Moff Gideon decides to take off on his jetpack and leave. Where is he going? We don't know. Where will he show up next? We still don't know. But the rest of the Mandos, they leave, they try to escape, as Paz Vizsla stays behind to basically protect the rest of the Mandos. And he's holding his own for quite a bit. I mean, Paz Vizsla has shut himself off from everyone else. He closed the door as Bo is trying to help him, tell him to come along, but the only way they were going to be able to survive was if Paz stayed behind and tried to take down enemy lines. So Bo escapes. Paz stays at the end. He's fighting off these super elite commandos. His artillery gun is getting overheated. He is doing all that he can to defend himself, and this was just an incredible moment to see how strong and how brave Paz really is, and how much he cares for his people. He takes his gun, he knocks out a couple of troopers here, and he just shows us an incredible amount of brute strength of how strong he is, taking them out with his bare hands. And he ends up knocking one of them in their chest and completely just throws them off the cliff, which was an incredible part of the fight. And as he stands there waiting, thinking that he won the fight, we get something amazing. We get the petroleum guards. I was absolutely in shock when I saw these 3 guards, because the last time we see these guards were with Snoke, and they are walking, they are ominous, they are evil, they have like Beskar armor, these crazy cool helmets, and Paz he's ready to fight all 3 of them. He thinks he can take them on, but unfortunately, by the time he takes out his ray shield and his blade, it wasn't enough. These 3 guards made very quick work of Paz. Paz is mortally wounded, and he is taken advantage of in this fight. And unfortunately, Paz Vizsla, a character that so many people hated in the beginning, who now love this character, is basically getting dismantled by these 3 guards. And he is putting up so much of a great fight, but it was just not enough. Unfortunately, it was a numbers game. It was 3-on-1, 3 highly trained assassin guards versus 1 primitive Mandalorian with brute strength. He held his own, but unfortunately, Paz Vizsla falls to the hands of the Praetorian guards. And that was the end of this episode. If you guys enjoyed what you saw, make sure you hit that subscribe button and notifications bell. Don't forget to hit that like button as well while you're at it. And if you did enjoy this, make sure you stick around, because I will be posting more episodes like this on my NGN Nerd Guy News channel. Catch you guys on the flip side. May the force be with you. And this is the way. Man, it's good to be back.